And so this panel aims to address patient needs. And so with that, I will ask our panelists to briefly please introduce themselves, and we will hear some of their accounts.
I'm Robin Berliner, his wife and caregiver.
I'm Meredith Patterson. I'm a neuroscience nurse in Texas.
I'm Jamila Ali Rahman, and I'm the CEO and founder of Friends of Parkinson's.
My name's Michael Austin. I'm a retired. Oh boy. So you got it. I'm a retired academic, but unfortunately not in the biological sciences, in the business administration area, as in finance. But I am a Parkinson's patient, and I've been asked to come here to share my success, I guess you would say, with using the juicing technique of extracting CBD and incorporating it into a dietary regimen that has helped me. There's a patent behind it that supports it, and that's basically what I'm here for, is to answer any questions about what I've been doing.
Thank you very much. So how much time do we have altogether? 40 minutes, okay. So I think it would be helpful to make it interactive, and we're going to start out. Absolutely. We have a microphone.
My name is Mona Lisa Samuelson, and I am Nevada's very first medical marijuana patient advocate and community activist. I am also your patient medical marijuana lobbyist. And it's very nice to see patients and caregivers on this panel. So thank you so much for putting our voice into this discussion. Now, what I wanted to ask was, as we talk about the dialogue that needs to happen, as a patient that was literally ground zero here in Nevada's movement, I'm wondering when this industry is going to start forwarding the dialogue about how to use whole plant medicine on your own. Meaning, it's one thing to have somewhere to go to rely on things for tourists, but when you're talking about residents and people who live here, we need to learn how to take care of ourselves. We have to be self-sufficient. And so that really requires a dialogue about customization to address specific malady and how we need to do that at home. And so I know that this industry here in Nevada is very interested about having things regulated through dispensaries, but for patients' needs, for medical needs, we have to ingest this plant in copious amounts. And not only do we need to know how it's going to affect us, but we have to stringently take control of the elements that we're going to ingest. And this we cannot do through the regulatory process that we have now standardized. So I'm wondering when and how can we all push this dialogue forward through panels like this? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that comment. Our panelists are welcome to share their experiences and respond to that. And I would like to start with pointing out how much interest we are seeing among our patients. It's just amazing. I usually have trainees with me in clinic, these are residents in neurology or medicine or family medicine, could be medical students. And I told one of them on a beginning of a clinic day, I'm in clinic all day seeing patients, that just to count how many of the patients will ask about medical marijuana. Turns out every Parkinson patient that day asked in one way or another, or shared experiences one way or another. And I can also ask, we discussed with Jamila earlier, how much there is, as in the community, as you represented Friends of Parkinson's, there is always interest and request by the patients to address this.
Right. And there is an interest, and there's a vast interest. And when you address the fact that, the patient needs to know how to use it properly at home, so it starts with an education. But there also has to be a standardization of the product itself, because if you find something one day and then you go get it the next day and it's different, How is the patient who is not a scientist who knows how to cultivate that particular product in order to make sure that it's standardized for his use? You know, that's a really big question, even with the interests that we have. You know, my feeling is you want to educate yourself first, talk to someone, get to know the people with whom you are working with in order to help yourself physically with the product, especially if you're getting any kind of results. And I know that with our organization, many of our patients, many of our members that use the cannabis are having some good results in specific areas. We don't have all of them to address, but it also goes back to standardization, because one day it works, next day it does not.
I think Jamila mentioned the scientific approach and the importance of reproducibility and how to use it at home. So I think it helps if you're a scientist and a patient. And I had a very enlightening conversation with Mr. Austin, who's a scientist and a patient, in how he really tested what works and analyzed his responses and analyzed as to what is reproducible and how it was a truly fascinating story. I wonder if you could maybe share some of that experience that has been going on for 5 years, I believe.
Is this on?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess it's on. Where do I start? I don't have enough time to do the whole thing. By the way, I've developed a now 13-page single-space write-up of everything that I've concluded from the research that I've done and the work that I've done to try and make the transition from the theory and the research that's been done to actually something that works. That gets out the door, so you don't have to wait for 15 years for the FDA to bless something that you know in your heart is going to work for you. And that's basically where I'm at. I've done quite a bit of research of the internet variety and the Google variety. I've got Google down until I've gotten quite proficient at it. And I've, found innovators, that use the juicing technique as opposed to the vaping or the whatever technique you want to call it. 99 and 44/100% of the usage of marijuana is through inhaling and bringing it into your system in that method. According to the research that's been done by the patent that some people may have heard of, but it was work that was done in part by Dr. Julius Axelrod, who's passed away. He was quite old when he was given the patent, but he was the director of research at the National Institute of Health, and which is a part of the Health and Human Services. I believe that's the patent that the Epidiolex evolved from. And I just took that patent and applied that using the juicing technique. The volume of consumption of the ingredients that calls for is rather extreme. And you don't want it to be psychoactivated, or you're going to be a hopeless basket case. And it's called throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Basically, the level of consumption of the basic ingredients that I consume is the equivalent of about 150 to 200 joints a day. And if anybody knows anything about that, the meaning of that, you don't want to go there. It's not a world that you want to be living in. But because of a concept called decarboxylation, I don't know how many of people are familiar with that term. Basically, when in the raw green state of marijuana, the active ingredients are THC acid, and cannabidiol acid, also known as CBD or CBDA. There's a difference between the two, and the difference is the acid form of the molecule decomposes into THC and CBD through heat. You apply heat to it, and the biology of it is that the carboxyl group is what they call it, disengages from the molecule and it becomes psychoactive. CBD, when it's psychoactive, is not that different from it in its acidic state, but THC is quite a bit of difference. When you go from THC acid to THC, you go from a molecule that has virtually no effect on you of a psychoactive basis, but when you heat it up, it becomes psychoactive, and then you either get great joy from it or great misery depending on the quantity that you consume. And the quantity that I consume based on the patent work that was done is you don't have any choice. You can't go with it being psychoactive. And that's basically the long and the short of it.
Wow. That's a pretty involved experience right there. Can you comment on your observation as far as your symptoms in terms of the effect that you observed?
Actually, I can give you an anecdotal example of what I've experienced in a kind of a backward way. I discovered that the way to do it, using the approach that I'm having to take, is to get the juice and then combine it with coconut milk. In the coconut milk, who was it? Was it you? I'm not sure who else was talking about the lipophilic attribute of marijuana. Lipophilic is like Philadelphia, meaning the city of brotherly love. So lipophilic means that marijuana loves fats. Okay, it doesn't like water, so fats and water don't mix. So what I did is I created a vehicle for combining it with the coconut milk to get it into a form where it could be frozen, and then the freezing of it and packaging it in a kind of a standard packaging approach that you use for storing fruits and vegetables in the refrigerator without being exposed to air. Basically, it sucks the air out, and then you freeze it, and it seems to work. I don't know scientifically whether or not it's exceeded its use-by date, but I keep it for up to about a year, and it doesn't seem to have any adverse effect. So I grow enough of high CBD marijuana that most people wouldn't get their, quote, jollies off of if they were into recreational consumption. Doesn't make any difference to me because I don't use it for that way, and I juice it and then combine it with the excuse me, I'm a little bit nervous in front of a public group here. Yeah.
I have a question. As a scientist and a patient, we often hear about THC and CBD, and we talk about how that affects things, but as a more knowledgeable patient, I think that a great conversation should be started around CBG and how that's the precursor, because then people understand that you don't need just marijuana, you need marijuana in various stages of maturation. And that's why home grows and patients need to learn, because in order to use this thing in its most effective form, you need several variations of the exact same panel. And so I'd love to discuss that and have that dialogue going as we keep this moving forward. Thank you for letting me put that in there.
Thank you. And there's one more question in the back.
When you do your juicing, do you juice the stalk, the whole plant, the leaves, or is there a certain part of the plant that you're looking for? And when you do that, you said you grow or your own low THC, high CBD spectrum plant. Is there any terpene profile or trichome profile you specifically go for? Or are you just specifically looking for the higher CBD ratio?
Kind of on a spectrum. The way I look at it is the plant that I would like to find, for the most part, doesn't exist in its natural state. The kind of a plant that I would be looking for would be a plant that was prevalent probably in the 1950s, before it became popular to get THC way out of its norm, because let's face it, the people that were into this wanted something different than we wanted, or that we, being myself and others, so inclined. And even within that realm, the person that I picked up most of my knowledge about this is Dr. Courtney, who some people may have heard of, but he's kind of a big advocate of the juicing concept. He went to an extreme that I don't even agree with, which is to do away with THC as much as possible, so that you didn't have to worry about people inadvertently getting high. It's not a problem as long as you don't let it decarboxylate. It's very simple. It's not that difficult to do. I haven't had any trouble at all with it. But what he does is he came up with a strain called ACDC, which is almost 100% CBD with very little, if any, THC. And there's a concept called the entourage effect, which I think maybe some people have heard of. Basically, it's kind of a holistic concept that the plant is 80 some odd cannabinoids, of which CBD and THC are the two most popular and well known. But we just don't know what the interactions between all of these cannabinoids are. We just feel strongly that the endocannabinoid system is important, and the endocannabinoid system comes along with all of those cannabinoids that are in the plant. So you want a plant that is kind of unmodified by social things that have happened over the years. Unfortunately, you can't find that plant because it doesn't exist. The economics are such that it's pushed it way over to one end of the spectrum with high THC and low everything else. They just don't care about anything that doesn't get you stoned, quote unquote. And you don't want to get stoned. You don't want a bunch of kids with epileptic seizures taking too much of this stuff, and they just wind up having a little infant that's a zombie. It doesn't work. And that's the source for the Epidiolex that's worked. But you don't have the entourage effect with Epidiolex because you've scientifically made it pure. You've made it pure so that it no longer gets those interactions that you think are beneficial. At least that's my opinion. And consequently, I chose a strain called Canasu, which is a cross between Canatonic. Some of these names are very creative and humorous somewhat, but anyway, they took Canatonic and crossed it with Sour Tsunami. Okay, so you can see this anyway. The vivid images are entertaining, but they don't buy you very much. So anyway, I've kind of found Canasu to be the one that works best for me, but there are others that work well also. But I'm basically trying to replicate as best I can what would have been around in the 1950s before it got modified so much to be biased towards the THC side. That's just...
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And then with that, we would also like to hear from our other patient on the panel. Irving, if you could say a few words about your experiences.
I've had Parkinson's for 11 years now. And my biggest problem I have is I can't sleep. So I use cannabis to sleep. I have terrible insomnia, and I couldn't sleep for more than 2 hours at a whack. So what happens is my drugs wear off. Sometimes my medication works, sometimes it doesn't. But when you're laying in bed shaking, you have to have something. So I've only used it for sleeping. And the problem I found is, since they legalized it for the general public, my dosage amounts go down. There's no constant drug available. Not drug, but my wife can better explain it. She does the shopping for me. I mean, but you can't get the same thing on an ongoing basis. One time it's one thing, it's another. And you can't rely on it. Sometimes they have it, sometimes they don't.
Yes.
I mean, I would like to see some type of regulation so you know what you're getting. And I would not try to stop taking my medication for my Parkinson's and trying something like marijuana when there's no regulation on what you're getting. So I would never do that.
And
But-
if I can weigh in on this, as a nurse, I see and hear from patients and consumers so interested in applications such as yours and others. But it's really like the Wild West out there right now. We definitely need better product labeling. We need to know what ingredients are in what products. Moreover, we need a go-to source. We need like the MedMD of cannabis or something, because when I Google, as most people do, and I'm looking up how do I dose something, what do I treat a certain condition with, what are it's all over the place. It's all over the place. I am learning, frankly, more from hearing from patients' experience. Why can't we have this dialogue across cyberspace with each other? It would help me so much to talk to other practitioners and to patients for their experience. And not a rant, but what's working for you. Because, you know, as I've sat here and listened to these wonderful research people, it's fascinating. But like Andrea and John, people want answers right here, right now. So let's take, even if it's anecdotal, I mean, even physicians, practitioners, patients, maybe we can quantify that anecdotal material and put it into terms where this is what we think works right now. So I have a laundry list of things that I would like to see. I think it's very frustrating for people like you who are trying to advocate, for people like me who are trying to help and answer questions where I can't really get good answers myself.
I agree totally with that, and to further confirm Irving's experiences, the lack of labeling, lack of consistency. Andrea is working very hard in addressing that problem in cataloging and developing registries where you look at the label and you know what it is every time, and it's not like the same thing is called different labels, and sometimes the same label has different things. So that is one problem. And in terms of the experiences, I totally agree that in the setting of support groups and self-organization, sharing these experiences is incredibly valuable.
Okay, I have a comment also. You know, one of the things that perhaps we need to look at is maybe one size doesn't fit all. And so when someone may have a certain need for a particular formulated use, it may not work for me. You can't, if we all had Parkinson's in this room, you know, we would probably all be on a different regimen. So the standardization comes when you're looking at the consistency of the product, but the use and application has to be totally different for each individual because it doesn't work the same or process the same in each body.
There is a method to this. And there was one question here.
Yeah, I'm Linda Klampers, and I'm a clinical researcher, so then you work in very controlled environments. So I would like to make use of the opportunity to ask questions to the patients about the experience regarding insomnia. You indicated that you could sleep for around 2 hours per night. Now, with cannabis, you can sleep longer, and I'm very curious about the variation in time. How long can you actually sleep with what you use? And then when you wake up too early, do you then use again? And how do you feel the next morning?
What I do is I take my carbidopa and about 1 hour before I go to bed. I take my cannabis about an hour before. So that way when it takes about an hour for the carbidopa to kick in, and that way the cannabis has got me drowsy. so I can lay down and go to sleep. As long as nothing happens, I don't have to go to the bathroom or anything like that, I sleep through the night. And I wake up refreshed. But other than that, I mean, she has a rough time because we sleep in the same bed and I shake all the time. And it's really not good for her and myself. I mean,
He only uses the edible and straight THC. We found that CBD makes him wired. I know he has a high tolerance or something, I don't know, but it's just edibles. He doesn't smoke or anything. The edibles put him out most of the night when they work. Sometimes they don't work, but they work often enough that we keep trying, so.
And to just follow up on the comment that one size doesn't fit all, a couple of things. So even with traditional Parkinson medications, for instance, we are faced with the incredible heterogeneity of the patient's problems as to how they prioritize. Even if they look alike, even if the symptoms are the same, they may feel like the tremor is not bothering them or the dyskinesias won't bother them. And so how we use the really long list of various Parkinson traditional treatments is a major challenge for Parkinson and movement disorder specialists. Now imagine that challenge where you are moving outside of the traditional treatment realms and you're looking at products that are not proven and tested as such. So it becomes even harder. And the hardest part is that you can't rely on your physician's advice in that. For instance, if a patient comes to me and sees me here, our clinic is right across, what I say is strictly regulated by my institution. I say, well, I'm sorry, I can't prescribe it. I don't know if you should get a card and go medical marijuana because that puts you on a bunch of lists that you may not want to do, and perhaps consider recreational and see if it works for you. And then the patient is like, how? Which one? Where to go? And that also speaks to, you know, the importance of self-organizing in some way where you can find information and experiences. And even though we have many different problems, just in I'm just talking about Parkinson's disease and not even epilepsy and pain and everything else that you may consider. But even in Parkinson's disease, you may have to figure out, well, the main problem is I can't sleep, or my main problem is that my back hurts, or I have dyskinesias. We discussed that many of my patients report if I have to put two things that are up there as far as experiences, relatively a high hit rate or percentage of success would be dyskinesias, levodopa-induced dyskinesias, which are very difficult to tackle. One option is to reduce their medication that helps them in the first place, and that's no good. And many times cannabis use help patients. There are a bunch of videos on YouTube to back that up anecdotally. And then the other thing is anxiety. And so we talked about that. So depending on what the problem is or what the patient is looking primarily to help with, or what the main source of disability in their subjective perspective, you might be able to guide them. But again, I can't, and that's kind of bringing the attention to patient groups and other forums, Facebook, or anything that people can share their experiences with each other.
Well, just to add to the problem of logistics that you mentioned, so I come to you from another galaxy on planet Texas, and the only use for medical cannabis is intractable epilepsy. So if you have that condition in Texas, you must find a board-certified neurologist who is vetted by the state and approved through the DPS. There's about, last time I checked, about 40 of those people, and Texas is a big place, y'all. And most of those practitioners are in major cities. I don't think there's anyone south or west of San Antonio. So if you're unfortunate enough to, say, have epilepsy and you live in El Paso or in Brownsville, you've got a long, daunting drive. And then you have to get a second opinion from someone else. Then once you have that approval, then you have count them, 3 dispensaries in the whole state to get your product. So the logistics are a nightmare, and I'm seeing the same problem, just talking kind of nuts and bolts for people, because, we do have hemp-derived CBD, but that's daunting too, because I was talking with Dr. Murphy about, the conversation kind of goes, well, you could try CBD maybe for your pain or your arthritis and so on, or for sleeping, and then they go to a dispensary. But there's such a wide array of products. It's not inexpensive. And as you pointed out, not the same thing works at all. All our biochemistry is different. So works for one person may not work at all for someone else. And this can really add up. I'd like to see quality companies produce like sample packs, for instance, for practitioners, just so that we could have something here, try this before you go spend $100 a pop, that kind of thing. The good part of it is that with dispensaries, like with your example, patients can titrate and choose the route of administration, which I think gives them a lot more autonomy, and I like that a lot.
Yeah.
And there is another question right here.
Yeah, that is a simple one to any one of you who can answer is, how much does it cost? Not everybody can grow their own weed in the backyard, and so not only are you as a patient relying on doing yourself trials to find out eventually what might work for you, but you also have to pay for it. So in your experience, how much do Parkinson's patients have to pay for their cannabis, every month or so?
Comes to me, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know about Nevada. We're in California. We live here now, but I purchased in California just before they went recreational. And when they did that, they cut down the dosages, and what you could get is 100 milligrams, and it would be about $45. When I purchased it, I could get 1,000 milligrams, which I can cut into many, many servings for him, and it was about $40. But it's gone up since it's gone recreational, because they cater to them now.
And they don't have it.
And I go to a dispensary. Luckily, I don't think they have that here. It seems that the dispensaries are all established and very clinical. I would be chasing them. I would go, okay, I bought this last week. I would go to the same dispensary, gone. And someone would run out to my car and say, here, we've gone here under another name. I felt like I was, like I was a drug addict or something. Yeah, look at my drugs. So I was really glad to move here because it looks like it's very clinical here and established. But yeah, it's about,
In terms
I
of
don't know,
out
it's
of
about
pocket.
$40.
We used to joke, we didn't expect our senior years to be running around trying to find drugs.
Yeah. Togetherness. Yeah.
So I think in terms of out of pocket costs, Michael, you don't spend that much.
I don't, but it's only because of the way Nevada regulates, the product. I'm originally from California, from San Diego specifically, and I researched it and found that if you're trying to do what I was trying to do, that California was not the place to be. Nevada turned out to be the place to be, and it's all because of the way they have it set up. The way it works, and if I'm off base on this and somebody has a better answer than I do, I'd be more than happy to hear it. But my understanding of the way it works is that if you don't have a dispensary within 25 miles of where you reside, you can grow your own. Otherwise, you have to buy the product if it's available, and if it's not available, then you can't.
Another question in the back?
Yes. I just returned from 3 years being active in the cannabis industry in Canada. And I'm unfamiliar really with exactly what the regs are here in Nevada, just learning that. But I do recognize that the various states that have legalized medical cannabis, each has its own kind of way of handling things. In Canada, it's a national approval under certain circumstances for medical cannabis, and they impose very strict standards for all of the growers and for the way in which it's put up for sale. And the company that I was chairman and CEO for actually started about 6 years ago in the medical cannabis area, and they started out helping those who had the horrible pharma cocktails for PTSD sufferers. And the cannabis helped them move from being low-functioning vegetables to actually having a life again. And we had about 12,000 clients or patients go through our doors, and the results were astounding. You've talked about the unreliability of your product. We don't have that problem in Canada. The different licensed producers have branded products, but it identifies what the CBD, THC quantum happens to be and other aspects, the other parts of the profile of what they're selling, and it's consistent from one order to the next. And it seems to me that the real problem here in the States is that without some kind of organization and discipline and I guess you'd say regulation of these producers, you're going to have chaos from one order to another, and that's what needs to be enforced or established within the states. And I think there needs to be, if nothing else, since the feds are still being reactionary on this, perhaps some kind of a state organization amongst the states to establish standards similar to Canada might be a great step forward.
Thank you.
Can I make one comment? I kind of sense people wanted to hear what it cost to do this. I got halfway there, but I didn't get to the bottom line. If I was to go through the normal channels and buy my raw materials as opposed to making it myself, what I need to consume would cost me about $80,000 a year. And that's all because you're having to buy recreational marijuana, even though they call it medical marijuana. The two are basically not that separated other than the name that they attach to them. So consequently, the price that you pay for it makes it prohibitive. And if I couldn't grow it myself, I couldn't afford to. I'd just be broke, you know. So that's the reality of it.
But isn't that the reality of medications all the way around, though? And I think with the use or the continued experimentation with the use of cannabis, perhaps we have to come to some conclusions about how to properly even man the dollars, because medications themselves have become exorbitant for the Parkinson's community. And so now we're looking at someone who wants to use medical marijuana or some form of cannabis, and it's still cost prohibitive. We need to look at cost and make it affordable so people can treat themselves and be well.
And I think on that note, we hope that as it becomes mainstream, production costs could be, I think, more moderated, and so there is hope. We have one more question.
I was just going to add in on the cost aspect of it. I am a medical refugee. I'm from Texas, and as a matter of fact, my wife is a PhD doctoral student finishing up her doctorate, and I am a retired former deputy sheriff. So I understand the legal aspects of it, and I understand that just having this vaporizer that I carry to be able to medicate is a felony in the state of Texas, which means I could face prison my wife being in the car with me, or if I accidentally leave that in the car when she's going to work, she's facing prison, which puts an end to her doctorate. So we were forced to move here after I discovered that the medication would allow me to back off all of my muscle relaxers, all of my sleeping medication. It was life-changing for me. And I had to leave my children because of a child custody issue in another state, all because of this Schedule 1 narcotics. I might as well go into child custody in court and say I can't work overtime and pay my child support because I need cocaine to be able to work the extra. There is no argument with the Schedule 1 narcotics, so I had to leave the state. And doing that, I found exactly what you found. The cost is so prohibitive. And you need the THC and the CBD to work within your endocannabinoid system. We have an endocannabinoid system within our body. We have receptors to take up what this plant provides, and we're not allowed to do it for man's law. And things have changed. When you look at when this became illegal and the scheduling that was put in place and the neurological diseases that have grown, not because of it, but just are unchecked. I believe that there are so many benefits neurologically from this medication, and there is a U.S. patent that the Health and Human Services does own, which means all of us in this room who are U.S. citizens own it, that say that the THC molecule is a neuroprotectant.
Thank you very much for everyone for the interactive session and our panelists. I think this panel discussion and dialogue definitely showcased how much passion and need there is out there, and it's to be continued. Thank you.